Joining me in the studio to talk about the four-day state visit is award-winning journalist Simon Marks. He's the president and chief correspondent at Feature Story News. And Simon, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, this was a remarkable trip, wasn't it?
It was an extraordinary visit. I mean, this began with Queen Elizabeth II presenting President Xi Jinping with a book of Shakespearean sonnets. It ends with those amazing scenes in Manchester and President Xi essentially inaugurating a new direct flight from Manchester Airport back to Beijing, and meandered through a British pub where they both sat down and had a pint of beer, President Xi and David Cameron, with real business deals being accomplished all the way, and really, realistically, a new equilibrium being struck in the relationship between the United Kingdom and China, an equilibrium that is based in very large measure now on a reinvigorated, Chinese-led economic understanding between the two countries. And in many ways, you know, this were the concrete achievements here over the last 4 days are substantially larger than the concrete achievements that President Xi and Barack Obama, for example, notched up on the recent visit to Washington.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. And I want to spend a lot more time on the UK visit, but you touched on the US. There's two different approaches here. You see collaboration with one country, you see containment with the other. At least that's the perception in China. The US has one entirely different way. And it's remarkable to watch them, especially back-to-back like this.
Well, if you look at what went on here in the United States, and we all covered this, of course, the United States and the Obama administration was raising pressure points with President Xi throughout the visit. You didn't see that very much over the course of the last few days. David Cameron, you saw those extraordinary scenes there at the end of Richard Bestick's piece. The people of places like Manchester were saying, we are ready to do deals, and concrete deals. 30% stake in a new nuclear plant that's going to be built in Essex. Chinese investment helping the British government really raise the economic profile and the prospects of economic recovery in the north of England. A relationship with George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the British Finance Minister, that's very personal and very focused by George Osborne on trying to bring the Chinese, you know, weaving them into the fabric of the British economy. Now, David Cameron is being criticised by some in Britain who say he shouldn't have tacked that far towards the positive in terms of the relationship with China, that he has abandoned some of the pressure points that the American government, for example, was raising. But you can't deny that David Cameron has, whatever you think of that decision, created a new balance with Xi Jinping on which both sides can now build.
Well, let me ask you about Xi Jinping and just the optics. You brought up the fish and chips, of course, today. The selfie with one of the strikers. There's kind of this softer side, something it also seems extraordinary. It reminds me of Deng Xiaoping with the cowboy hat. That's another remarkable piece of all of this.
Yeah, and I think, again, in terms of the contrast with the United States, aided as well by the fact that the British public, I think it's fair to say, have a greater sense of who he is, and they're more internationally focused than perhaps some people in the United States. So you don't get the same sort of reception here in the US that you find on the streets of Britain. You know, the optics of that visit to the pub, the pint, the fish and chips, very, very redolent of the kind of visits that international leaders from other parts of the world that are more traditionally accepted by the British public have received in the past. And of course, Britain is aided in very large measure by the pomp and ceremony that it's able to put on. This was a state visit with all the trappings of a state visit, and the British government really using Buckingham Palace, Queen Elizabeth II as part and parcel of what we always refer to as brand Britain. She's the leader of the firm. It's a corporate approach, and she was used to every possible regard in terms of bringing him in.
He knows how to win over the people of the UK. He mentioned Shakespeare, that he'd found this translated version of Hamlet at a young age, and talked about, you know, Dickens, but also the number one thing you're going to hit if you're going to go and win over the people of the UK, football.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was another big piece of this, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And the visit to Manchester City also, in a way, only underscoring ties that already exist, people-to-people ties between the UK and China, you know, honouring a Chinese player who has played very successfully for the club over the past several years. And I think really putting himself across as a personality with whom the British public can begin to identify. They, of course, identify with Barack Obama, and they know the characteristics of who other world leaders, Vladimir Putin, for example, they understand who they are. Xi Jinping can now walk down British high streets and be recognized. And that's a big difference for a Chinese leader.
We know how well this is received in China. It's gone over very, very well. What about in the UK?
Look, it's gone over well. There is a debate underway about the extent to which David Cameron has given away too much to the Chinese. This investment in the nuclear plant in Essex, giving China a 30% stake in a new nuclear plant, that's a strategic plant that's going to be built in the south of England, is not without controversy, and that will continue to play out in Britain. The Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the opposition, raised the issue of human rights personally with Xi Jinping when they sat down. He argues that the British government should have had that higher up the agenda. And Xi Jinping said to the British government, and to the British people, we really want Britain to stay in the EU. And that's a big unresolved issue that is going to play out over the course of the next several months. So there will be a debate about exactly how this went down, but what cannot be debated is that the fundamental relationship has now changed in a way that the Chinese, I suspect, and certainly the British will hope, other European nations pay attention to and eventually emulate.
Let me ask you about this tilt, because this is huge, the state visit, but we saw England way out in front, joining the AIIB, the U.S. not very happy about that, the trading of the renminbi, this tilt in that direction. Talk to me about, strategically, why UK making this move?
The British government saw an opening. They saw an opportunity to be the place in Europe that most welcomes Chinese money. They stole a march on Germany by starting to trade in the Chinese currency. The AIIB decision to back the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, disappointing to Britain's special relationship ally on the other side of the Atlantic, President Obama in the White House. But Britain is at a point in its development where its own future is uncertain. David Cameron doesn't know if he's going to be leading, in a few years' time, a European nation or one that decides to go it alone. He needs investment, he needs help. He's found it with Xi Jinping, and he's found a ready and willing ally.
We've got about 30 seconds. This relationship between the UK and the US as a result of this, how do you see it? Is it fractured?
Between the UK and the US, I think it's under some degree of pressure. Both sides will always tell you we share a common language, we share a common heritage. There will always be a special relationship between the two countries. But if you are Barack Obama in the White House or his potential successor watching this, you are aware that new bilateral relationships are developing and you don't necessarily have much control over them.
Simon Marks, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming in.